Kara vīra līga viņa, kara vīra līga viņa, sēdais galdā rauda dāma, sēdais galdā rauda.
What is your first thought related to Latvia?
Home.
Sēdais galdā rauda dāma, sēdais galdā.
Your first thought related to Germany?
Part of my childhood. I have very fond memories at the same time as some of the worst memories of my life come from Germany.
Morocco.
Exoticism. I was looking for exoticism, and at the time I couldn't see it, and it's only after I left Morocco that I realized how exotic it had been.
European Union.
Our common home.
Democracy.
Freedom.
Refugees.
Loss. Loss of everything that you have held dear, and that was yours. Total loss.
And to Sigmund Freud?
A genius and a quack.
Ismail Serigaldin?
My friend, my brother, my twin.
And what is your first thought related to the Nizami Ganjavi International Center?
A growing and flourishing tree that is spreading its branches all over the world.
Excellency Vaira Vike-Freiberga, our president, and people on streets call simply Vaira. She is Vaira for people, and that means that our people love her, respect her. I remember her speech in our song festival, and she said, "We are brave. Latvians, we are brave. We are free." It was so amazing.
Mēs esam stipra tauta. Sakiet lūdzu visi kopā, mēs esam stipri. Mēs esam stipri. Mēs esam dižani. Mēs esam ražani. Mēs esam ražani. Mēs esam skaisti. Mēs esam skaisti. Mēs iesim un darīsim visi, lai Latvija būtu skaista, lai Latvija būtu dižana, lai Latvija būtu varana. Ne tikai tauta, bet valsts. Un ne tikai hokeja spēlēs, bet varbūt arī dziesmu svētkos mēs varētu teikt Latvija, 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 Latvija.
Vaira always she was people president, not president for office, but president for people. And two very important events we had on the time when Vaira was president. She led us to join European Union and to join NATO. And today we understand how important it was. We, Latvia, are in Europe, and thanks to Vaira.
I have a habit always when I'm traveling to any country. I'm using a taxi and asking taxi driver what you think about this and that person. And about Vaira is she's identity. She brought up identity of the Latvian people. She brought what Latvian means, what being a Latvian citizen means, and especially her speech at the NATO when she made Latvia to be as a member of the NATO.
Latvia lost its independence for a very long time, and it knows the meaning both of liberty and the loss of it. Latvia knows the meaning of security and the loss of it. And this is why being invited in an alliance that will ensure our security is a momentous moment that will be writ large in the history of our nation. We make a solemn pledge and commitment here today on this historical and solemn occasion that we will strive to our utmost to do our part, to contribute not just to the strength of the alliance, but to do whatever needs to be done to create a world where justice and liberty are available to all. Thank you.
Sometimes when you're coming from the country that is mathematically speaking not so big in the sense of economy, in the sense of military power, in the sense of number of people that stand behind you, it is hard to lift up and speak on equal and even being above the militarily, economically, size-wise countries. But when you speak to Vaira, you have a feeling that you speak with someone who really runs a great power.
She is a remarkable personality of self-control, of self-planning, of planning the life and planning also the life of the people around her, and be always optimistic and sharp to the point. And her diplomacy is an effective diplomacy.
We meet lots of persons during our lives as a foreign minister, and later I've met different leaders from different countries from all over the world, men and women. And I want to share two understandings of who Vaira is. One was a Zoom conversation just after the invasion of Russia to the Ukraine. And then she was speaking so touching, so strongly against the invasion for the Ukraine. And I said, okay, now I understand what kind of leader she was while she was in office. A few months later, we've met in Baku, and we were standing there, each one reading a paper that we've got from Kerry Kennedy, Speak Truth to Power. And she was there, Vaira, speaking about her own experience, about her own childhood. And this was not only touching, it was the explanation how she became such a leader.
My name is Vaira Vike. I was born in Riga just before the Second World War, and on October 10, 1944, my parents decided that it looked like the Red Army was advancing, and they did take Riga on October the 13th. So on the evening of October the 10th, we took what we could carry. My grandmother was holding me by the hand, and we got to the first street corner, and I had a strange feeling that I am leaving behind my home and everything, and I stopped at the corner and looked back. My grandmother grabbed me by the shoulder and said, "Child, do not do that. It is bad luck. If you look back when you are leaving a place, you're never going to return to it."
I have an early memory where I must have been something like 3 years old of the occupation by the Soviet Union, during which people are driven out in the streets. Then I remember uniforms of Nazi Germany marching in our streets. And then I remember the sound of war approaching. My parents left
our apartment in Riga 3 days before it fell to the Red Army. We ultimately came to Germany, different parts of Mecklenburg. We were in one particular transit camp, which I think had been a concentration camp before us, or a prisoner of war camp. The conditions were really quite dreadful. My little sister died there. Mother and I were sick for a while. We lived through the Allied bombings at the end of the war in Seestadt Wismar in Mecklenburg, and then waited which army would occupy that part of Germany. And so, with the British help, we managed to get to Lübeck. I started school, very improvised by the Latvian refugees themselves, under camps organized by the International Refugees Organization. When the camps are being closed in early 1949, we had to choose whether to go to Brazil, to Australia, or someplace else. There weren't that many countries offering refuge to these refugees, but Morocco, French Morocco, was one of them, and that's how I came to be spending the end of my childhood and the beginning of my adolescence in what was then a French protectorate, and therefore I had French schooling. But when we went to Canada, as Morocco was approaching independence, our friends who helped us get to Canada were living in English-speaking Canada, in Toronto. So I started out getting my education in Toronto, then we moved to Montreal, and I spent my career as a professor of psychology in the francophone part of Canada, in the province of Quebec, in Montreal, until Latvia became free again. And in 1998, an offer came from the Prime Minister to head, in fact, to create a Latvian Institute and to come back to Latvia. And I accepted that offer, and it so happened that 8 months later I was elected president. Recovery of independence and becoming democratic after nearly half a century of authoritarian rule was not self-evident. Many people have been longing for freedom and longing for independence, but just exactly what it would look like and what we would all have to do during it wasn't necessarily clear. When I arrived in Latvia, of course I found a multi-party system. And when I say multi-party, I mean multi-party. I sometimes laughed at, you and I and our dog and cat will make a party and we'll stand for the elections. Well, newfound freedom meant that people, even small interest groups, would gather together. At one point there was a women's party, as if as if you could have a country of Amazons without any men in it, and so forth. So that when I came here for the Latvian Institute, we were looking also for what are Latvian values. I was and still am a specialist in Latvian folklore. When I arrived in Latvia, people knew me basically first as somebody who had published, together with my husband, a collection of sun songs, over 4,000 songs, where the sun is mentioned in a Latvian oral tradition called the Dainas, sort of lyrical folk songs. And I was accepted as somebody who cares about Latvian culture and who knows the key to the Latvian soul that is hidden in these folk songs, you see. This is why I was readily accepted, even though I had spent most of my life outside of the country.
Vaira Vike-Freiberga ir bijusi tautas mīlēta un cienīta prezidente. Un viņas viedoklī cilvēki ieklausās arī pēc prezidentūras beigām. Tas ir nozīmīgs, to sadzird, un to viņai arī jautā. Kā personība, Vaira Vike-Freiberga ir vienmēr mudinājusi latviešus tiekties pēc izcilības. Kā to panākt? To viņa ir parādījusi mums ar savu piemēru.
I remember that period when she came to Latvia, becoming president of Latvia and a highly respectable person in political arena. And we know each other, we know who is who in the political arena, and I fully respect everything what she has done during her terms as a president of Latvia, but also after this, after leading institutions like NGIC.
She made NGIC to be NGIC. She made Nizami Ganjavi International Center to be well known. Everyone who came to NGIC is due thanks to President Vaira Vike-Freiberga and Ismail Sarageldin. But President Vaira was a truly iconic personality. We couldn't be able to be more blessed to have such a leader. And she's a true person with whom you can talk on every single issue. And she will never need like a paper to prepare for her speech. And she's always going to the stage as a queen, how we call her.
Ideas are important. Exchanging ideas is more important still. This is why the freedom of speech and of expression is such a crucial part of the ideals that we hold dear. And this is why the Nizami Ganjavi International Center has an important role to play, as do other organizations with similar aims.
What is the impetus of NGIC and the motivation of its members, and what is your personal motivation?
Now this is where we have an agenda that after all is meant to include the values and ideas that centuries ago the great poem Nizami Ganjavi had promulgated in his writings, especially in his 5 epic poems, which are astoundingly modern and certainly very humanistic. And while we seem to be addressing problems of the day, which by their very nature are such that politicians are in charge of solving them, since in our society, civil society plays an increasingly larger role, NGIC is part of civil society, but as an international body. And I think this is what sort of multiplies its influence.
How do you as a politician measure the success of NGIC?
From year to year, as we organized events linked to Nizami's name, we started tackling the problems of the day. And when President Ilham Aliyev very kindly suggested that we should be organizing a forum in Baku, an international forum for discussing the problems of today, the ones of concern today, he said something rather like a Davos in terms of breadth of topics considered, and also with a certain cultural aspect to it. We have been growing from year to year. This is why I talked of a flourishing tree.
Vaira is one of the very few leaders of this world that is really a moral compass. She's wise, she's leading us, and on a long term, just imagine where we were 10 years ago at NGIC, as that was her vision, that was her idea. She started from the scratch, and just the last global forum where really performed as a small United Nations.
As the first female president in Central and Eastern Europe, Vaira is definitely a trailblazer for all women, but she's also a great role model in politics and in life.
She is so big as a personality, as a figure, inspiration, strength for so many of us.
She's a very, very strong
leader and an example for all of us.
She is a moral voice. She is a good friend. May she really understand how many accomplishments she has had in her life, how much she has changed the world, how many people respect her, how many people have learned from her, and how many lives she's changed.
Do you have any advice for politicians who lose their political power?
They have to evaluate why they are where they are, and decide in what direction they are going to go in the future.
And do you have any advice for people who become 85 years old?
Not to think about it too much, because you see, the strange thing is, I used to be, as a child, to look at old people as if they were a different species. It's very strange how I used to look at old people as something sort of different. Now that I am myself part of that group, I realize that I look out at the world with the same eyes that I had as a child, except these eyes feed into a brain that has, of course, accumulated a great deal of experience and hopefully a great deal of understanding of what the world is about. But when I look at a flower or at a beautiful sunset, frankly, it doesn't look that much different from what it looked like when I was a child. And if I'm able to look at a flower with the same joy that I felt as a child, then I know I'm still alive. When I lose that, then I will consider myself as being a part of that supposedly other race, which are old people.
Vaira is a goddess, as we know. She is somebody who all of us admire, and our fearless leader. We're so lucky to have Vaira in our lives.
用智慧和远见为国家、为世界带来和平与发展。
I'm there with you in spirit to celebrate the beloved friend and much admired leader and esteemed intellectual and the wonderful human being that you are. May you have many, many happy returns.
I wish your health, well-being, and happiness for the rest of your life.
Sretan rođendan, Vaira.
She's very young, and I'm expecting her to deliver more in next 10 years. Srećan rođendan, Vaira.
Vaira, бъди здрава и щастлива.
დაბადების დღეს გილოცავ, ძვირფასო ვაირა, ძალიან მიყვარს.
Mazal tov, Vaira.
Адкинізм Вайрек, ханым Vaira Vike-Freiberga.
Я дуже хочу сказати многое літа пані Вайрі.
Proud to be knowing you and proud to be sharing some part of my life journey with you. Thank you.